Welcome to Crochet to Create. This channel is dedicated to all things crochet, and in this video we are going to be talking about cross stitch hearts. We're calling this part 1. We're covering the pattern and how to read a pattern. We're going to talk about gauge and supplies and the body of the panels that we'll be making. Please remember to subscribe to the channel so that you can quickly come back again to see the videos, or if we have new ones, you want to hit the notifications button if you'd like to be notified of new videos that we're having. So we're going to take a look at the first part of this pattern. It's cross stitch hearts from Leisure Arts in a book included with other patterns. When I'm working with it, I keep it in these plastic sheets just to protect it while I'm using it, because you can see it gets a little worn when you're working with it. But I pulled it out so you could see it better while we're talking about it. How hard this is. This one is looking like it's a little bit past beginner, approaching intermediate, but it says it's easy, which I have to say, it has been fairly easy. But if you've never crocheted before and you've never cross-stitched before, it will be challenging. I would stick as close to the pattern as possible if you're a beginner. So this particular pattern calls for yarn, medium weight 4, which is also called worsted weight. And it talks about 6 ounces and 460 yards. So if you look here, 4, and this particular one says 812 yards. So I have plenty of yarn for the purple. And these are skeins, so this is working with a smaller skein obviously than what I am working with, because my skein is like twice that size. So here it calls for 1 skein. In the white it calls for 5 skeins. So the pattern calls for these colors: the white, the pink, yellow, blue, and green, and lavender. We talked about the yardage that you'll need for each one of those. I used whatever yarn I had, so as I said before, as long as it's a size 4, it's fine. So the first color in here is pink, and as you'll see is I have no pink here. I am using this orange here. I am using this orange to replace the pink. So I substituted a color for my personal preference, and along with the pink it calls for a yellow, so I used this one, and this is a different brand yarn. I think I have 3 or 4 different brands here. So I used that one for the yellow, and then of course we have the blue, and then we have the green, and then the lavender. So you'll see on the pattern here I'll have orange and teal marked to remind me of the colors I'm substituting out. Now the teal is real close. It doesn't look like it in this picture here, but the teal and the green in this pattern look very similar, so I didn't probably even need to mark that, but just to help keep everything straight and crystal clear. It's helpful when you're modifying a pattern, if you're more intermediate or advanced, or just feel like taking that deep dive right in as a beginner. You can replace colors. Again, as long as it has the medium weight or the weight called for this pattern, that's all that matters. Okay? So, and of course here's the white. This is the white that I'm using. You'll see here that it says it's A4 worsted weight, and this particular brand is Karen 1 pound. As long as you are using a yarn that is an acrylic and that is a medium weight, or worsted weight as it's often called, you'll be okay. So I've used this because it's what I have. I've also been using a Red Heart white, just because that's the kind of yarn that I have and I want to use up my yarn. The white calls for 5 skeins of 256 yards. So this one will cover, you know, a good 3 or 4. So you're going to need plenty of white. This pattern calls for 2 types of crochet hooks. The Tunisian hook, or what is also referred to as the Afghan hook. It looks like a cross between a knitting needle on this end, because this is more what a knitting needle looks like. And then on this end, it is looking like a typical crochet hook. So this pattern calls for a 5.5 millimeter or a size I. Millimeters are usually for European and other type measurement systems in the crochet world. We in the United States use the alphabet sizes, so this is a size I. But as you can tell, it does not say I on here anywhere. So how would you know if you needed an I and all they're giving you is millimeters? Well, for one, this will tell you. We have the actual pattern that tells you I need a size I Tunisian hook or a 5.5 millimeter. Plus there are standard charts that can be used and all that. So the next one that we're going to talk about is the standard crochet hook, or size H, 5 millimeter, and that's this one. Now this one actually has an H on it and the 5.0 millimeters. So that's handy. It has both the international and the US size on there. These are some of the additional supplies you will need. One of them is a yarn needle. It's fairly basic, of course, scissors. These are just my quick snips that I've had forever. And then some stitch markers. These come in handy. There are a couple different ones in here. I put them together. But what they do is they can count the rows and the stitches. So these come in super handy when you're doing large amounts of counting and you need to get them accurate. As with this pattern, each panel is 146 rows. This is a yarn needle. It's very thick. It's meant to be able to go in and out of yarn. It's what you use for finishing projects and sewing them together. You can also crochet projects together. And then here's some of the cross stitching I'm doing on one of the hearts. Right here is a stitch marker. It helps keep your count of rows. So I have one here, and then 20 rows later I have one here. That way I know as I count, I have 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. So I know when I get to this mark, I have now done 100 rows. So clearly I need to do about 40 more rows to finish up this panel. Next part of the pattern is gauge. That's what we're going to talk about. So you'll notice in this one it says 16 stitches, and this is with the Tunisian hook in the Tunisian simple stitch, or TSS stitch as they call it in this pattern. So 16 stitches and 14 rows equals 4 inches, and each strip is 7 inches wide. So the gauge swatch, if you were to do it, you would do it like the pattern, and you do it 5.5 inches wide and 4 inches high, and that should tell you the gauge that you have. So it says work same as body for 14 rows or 21 Tunisian simple stitch. So I did not make a swatch, but what I am going to do is show you that my gauge is actually dead on, which I'm kind of proud of. And how are we going to count these out? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. So my 16 stitches in the Tunisian simple stitch is dead on at 4 inches. So my gauge is good for the stitches, but let's check out for the rows. 14 rows are supposed to equal 4 inches. So I have my markers. We discussed these earlier, and this marker is actually at a 20 mark. So I'm going to put this one here right at a row. I'm not sure if you can see it or not, but these are the squares, and this is the 4-inch mark. Starts here, and according to the pattern we should have 14 rows. So let's count them out. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. So it's right at the 4 mark. I'm going to do that. Or gauge is not really important when you're doing a Afghan or a baby blanket. It'll either come out just a little smaller or a little bigger than it's supposed to, but that's okay. It's a blanket. So the stitch guide here says Tunisian simple stitch, abbreviated TSS, and again it has that video there, so in this Leisure Arts you can go to their website and look at this while you're using this pattern. You would insert the hook from right to left under next vertical bar, yarn over and pull up a loop. So this is the first part of the Tunisian stitch, and the vertical bar, you see the hook underneath it in this picture. So what does that look like on the actual pattern? So here you can see closest to the hook we have already pulled up through these vertical bars here. Here's one right under the hook. That's a vertical bar, and you see these have already been pulled up on the hook. So to do that, you simply go from right to left under the bar, you yarn over, they call that a yarn over, and you pull through, and that creates that first part of the Tunisian simple stitch in the stitch guide. One more time. Underneath, from right to left, grab yarn over and grab the yarn, pull it through, and slide it down on the hook. So when you crochet, just a helpful hint here, you notice that the hook has this smaller area here on the shaft, and then it goes to the bigger area. When you crochet, you need to make sure that you pull your stitches all the way back to this bigger area, because that's the actual size. If you just keep them down here, that stitch on there is going to be half the size of that. So you need to make sure that when you do this, you pull it back to where the base is so that you can get the proper size of the stitch. We're moving on to the instructions part. This is where we actually make the 5 strips. So it says use a standard crochet hook unless otherwise specified or indicated. Strip, make 5 of these. So make 1 strip using each color pink, yellow, blue, green, and lavender for round 1 of the border. And we'll talk about that a little later. Again, you should read through your instructions completely so you understand everything before you even start. So here it's saying to use the Tunisian hook. So with white and using the Tunisian hook, chain 21 stitches. So what does that look like? Start kind of, I hold the loop there, and then I just do a couple crochet stitches, slip stitches, and I pull it tight. And that's how I start mine. And a lot of people do slip stitches and things like that, and that's okay, but this is how I do mine. So it like creates a little knot at the bottom, and I'm starting with my chain. So it's at a chain 21, so we're going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, so we're simply wrapping around, pulling it through, 5, it's a chain stitch, wrap around and pull through, that's 6, so we keep going. Some of you may be wondering how I started off holding this. So I wrapped it around my index finger from back to front, and I take my middle finger and my thumb and I hold the piece I've already worked on down here. And then the amount of looseness or tightness that I use right here is called the tension. So when you crochet, you want to keep a pretty even tension so that all your stitches will be of the same size. And you see how I'm each time pulling it back on the base like we discussed before. So we're going to do 21 chain stitches. We have 21 stitches, chain stitches on our hook now. And the next thing it says is row 1 for foundation row, right side. Forward pass. Pull up a loop in each pull up a loop in second chain from hook and in each chain across. Now this is referring to the stitch guide that we did earlier with the vertical bar, but it's going to be a little different because it's the foundation row. So it said pull up a loop in the second chain from the hook. So what's the second chain? Let's look at that. So this is the first chain and this is the second chain. So we're going to go into the second chain, and there's a center, there's 3 sides to this, you'll see 2 outer and 1 inner, and I'm going to grab this inner one and put my hook all the way through it. And that's going to start creating those vertical bars. So I'm in the second chain from the hook, and now I'm pulling through and I'm putting it on the base. And we're going to keep doing that all the way across till we have, the base row is always the hardest to get started, till we have 21 of these. So I'm just getting my hook around it, and then I'm pulling that stitch up. So I'm going for the next one, and I'm finding that middle section of the stitch of the chain, wrapping around and pulling through. And we'll do that a few more times together. And then you can do it on your own, and we'll skip down to the next instruction. So I'm going to show you one more time. So we have 3 on the hook so far, and then the next stitch is here, and you see how if you open it up a little bit, there's sort of a vertical bar there already. So you're just going to go from right to left in there, wrap around and pull through. And again, you're just going to go right in through there, from the right to the left, wrap around and pull through. And you're going to do that all the way to the end. So when you're to the end of the row, you know that you are, because you'll have this tail which you started with on to the left, and you want to make sure that you actually have 21 loops on here. So that's 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 20, 21. So you want to make sure that you count those. And I count them every so often, you know, through the rows, just to make sure I'm still on point with that. Okay, so that was the forward pass. Now we're going to close the stitch. So the stitch consists of a forward pass and a return pass. And here it says to close return pass, yarn over, draw through 1 loop on hook, chain 1 made, yarn over and draw through 2 loops on hook across, and see figure C. So that's, they're ending it there. So 1 loop remaining on hook, and then you're done with that. It says loop a short piece of yarn around any stitch to mark row 1 as right side and bottom. I never do that, but you can do that if you like, because you're always working on the front side with this piece. Alright, so let's get started. So the first thing it said was to yarn over and pull through 1 to make a chain 1. And you're always going to do that at the beginning of your return pass. And then you're just going to yarn over and draw through 2. And you're going to yarn over and draw through 2 all the way to the end. Sometimes it's a little stubborn, and it is hard. This is probably the hardest part of this blanket, is doing these foundation rows. But luckily you only have to do 5 of them. So you see I almost went to 3, but I caught myself making sure I'm only going through 2 loops and pulling up. I'm always returning to the base, so I got my stitch size going. Wrap around, pull through 1, pull through 2, back to base, wrap around, pull through 1 and 2. So you notice I'm holding my foundation row with my finger and my thumb, while I'm using my index finger for the tension still. So I'm wrapping around and pulling through all the way to the end.
Once you get to the end, you have now done one full row of the Tunisian simple stitch until you have one loop remaining on the hook. Okay, so you can see the beginning of it. To do the second row, you go through the vertical bars. These are the vertical bars. You're not going to do the very last one on the edge because that's the first one. So you're going to go to the second vertical bar. And you're simply going to wrap around and pull through just like you did with the foundation row, but it's a lot easier because the vertical bars are now made. So going into the vertical bar from right to left. And now we're making this forward pass again that we reviewed with the simple stitch in the stitch guide. And as you can see, it's much easier to do this second row because you already have the vertical stitches made versus trying to create them off of the chain stitch. So again, right to left, wrap around, pull through, and you want to make sure that everything's staying on the hook. Now that's the difference between this Tunisian and regular crochet. Is regular crochet, you don't keep them on the hook like this. This is a knitting style to keep your loops on the hook. So a Tunisian stitch is known as sort of a cross between a crochet and a knitting. So it's basically knitting for crocheters, which is kind of nice because you get to get a little bit of both worlds. So you keep going all the way to the end with your forward pass. And don't worry if yours don't look beautiful the first time around, it's okay. You'll get better. And it's the edge, so the edge is going to be covered up with the border anyway. So it'll be fine. So you want to make sure you get this last one in. If you can see that. You can see there's one more stitch to go. There's one more vertical bar there. So you want to make sure you get that, because if you miss that, then you'll have 20 instead of 21. So let's do a quick count again. Let's see. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 20, 21. Okay, so we do have 21 still. And now you're starting to see the stitches. If you pull it out a little bit, you can see the row 1, and this is half of the row 2. So that was the forward pass. So let's do the return pass. So again, you start with just one chain, and then you go through 2. Again, wrapping around, pulling through 2 only, wrapping around, pulling through 2. Until you get to the end. So you really start to see this vertical bar is starting to develop here. That's the basic pattern for the panel. You keep doing that for 146 rows, okay? And once you get to that, let's go back to the pattern. So we've done this. We've done the to close, and then we started on row 2. So you see rows 2 through 146. It says skip the first vertical bar, work Tunisian simple stitch across and close. So we did that. Here's one panel, and I'm close to finishing. And it has close to 146 rows. But you can see these beautiful squares, and these squares are what you do your cross crochet hearts on. And we'll talk about that when we get to the crochet panels. So you make 5 of these, and you're probably wondering, how do I close them at the end of the panel? Because it does say, for the last row, skip vertical bar, slip stitch in each vertical bar. So you skip the first one, because you always do, and then you slip stitch in each vertical bar across and finish off. Okay, so, well, what does that look like? So I'm going to skip the first vertical bar. That would be this one, the very first one. And I'm going to go from right to left and pull this through here. Now normally this would be the beginning of our Tunisian simple stitch, but since we're finishing it off, we're going to pull it right through. Okay, so that's the first one. Second one from right to left, just like we do, pull through, only this time we're pulling through the loop that we have the hook on. And once you keep going and you get enough of those done, all the way across, and remember, this is working just like the forward pass, right to left, grab it, only instead of just holding it on the loop, you're pulling it through the loop that's on the hook. Now, in knitting, this is called casting off. This is Tunisian crochet, so what are they calling it? Just finishing it off. So right to left, wrap. Oop, I got 2. Watch out. Gotta pay attention. And then through both. So this, and then through that one. Just like a regular stitch, only all the way through instead of keeping it on the hook. And when you get going, you can do it all in one sweep instead of 2 steps, like I'm doing here. And the more you do this, the more comfortable it will become and feel, and you'll be doing it quickly in no time. You'll just start noticing, wow, I'm just like really cruising here. I'm not, you know, doing 2 steps. I'm just like banging it out. All right, so you see that creates that last row and finishes it off. Then to finish it off, what I do is I wrap it around, pull it, and then I take my scissors and I clip it here.
That's it for this first video on cross stitch hearts. I hope that you enjoyed it and learned a lot. Please remember to subscribe to the channel and hit the like button. And until next time, happy crocheting!